We're now going to move on to a presentation by Emily Smith from Research and Practice, for some of you may know as RIPFA. So Emily is going to talk about professional curiosity. So thank you, Emily, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to meet you, at least virtually. What an interesting day so far. I've been fortunate enough to be able to join from the beginning this morning, which is a really nice privilege for me. I don't often get let out. So it's really nice to be able to see some really interesting presentations from Surrey Police and all the thought and care into going into working with adults and also working jointly with partners from Surrey Police. Really fantastic conference, I think, to bring so many different professional perspectives together. I'm really pleased to be joining you from Research in Practice as part of this next session, which is all about, as Sarah said, professional curiosity. For those who don't know, Research in Practice is a national organisation. We work with and for professionals in social care, that's where our kind of roots came from, but also in health and criminal justice and higher education, looking at offering resources and learning opportunities, and also specialist expertise, all with the aim of enabling adults and carers and also children and families to live good lives. And we have a website that is full of events and resources, some of which I'll point you to today. We have lots of resources on the website that are open access, which means they're free for everybody to access. And you'll be able to, if you want to set up an account, you can, it's all free, you can access them. Some of the resources on the site are only free if your organisation has membership of Research in Practice. Fortunately, Surrey County Council do have membership. So if you're here from Surrey County Council, you can set up an account for free and access all those resources. Equally, if you have a mate here from Surrey County Council or a colleague or a partner, please do, you could ask them to access the resources and share some of that learning with you. So what will the next hour look like? Well, we're going to look at some of the evidence and research around professional curiosity, drawing from some of the research from across health and social care, justice, all from across children and families and work with adults, because there's some really useful research that we can draw on from work with children and families as well as work with adults. I'll point you to a few resources that you might want to go and look at in your own time if you're particularly interested in an area that we cover today. And there'll also be an opportunity throughout the session to just pause occasionally and reflect on your practice. I know days like today can feel quite busy and full up, let alone work in the realm of safeguarding. So hopefully today, at least this session, will be a bit of an opportunity occasionally as we go through to pause and think. And when we have those moments to pause and think, I will invite you, if you'd like to share something in the chat, which you'll see, I think, has been turned on for this meeting. So you should be able to post something in the chat if you'd like to as we go through those moments of reflection. Just a reminder about the chat, whatever you write can be seen by everybody. So please don't write anything confidential about yourself or anybody else, and do remember to be respectful in what you write. There are plenty of people here today who'll be able to see what you've written. So as we move from into the next hour or so, just less than an hour now, of learning and reflection, I'd like to invite you to take part in a bit of a warm-up reflection, which is also nice because it gives me a sense of who's in the room. I'm from Coventry, not Surrey, and so probably don't know any of you. So it's really nice for me to get a sense of who's here. I'd like to invite you, if you're happy to, comfortable to write in the chat one thing that made you smile recently. It can be absolutely anything, tiny or huge, but something that made you smile. Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Diane, for starting us off. I always have a moment of fear when I ask a question like this that no one's going to respond. And I'll be left just talking to a blank screen. Oh, this is lovely. Thank you so much. So we're seeing some really lovely ones around, lots around nature. Lots of people with new puppies and dogs. conversations with friends, a walk on the beach. Lots of people talking about the sunrise this morning. Clearly I was far too buried in work or getting up in the morning to see it. People talking about family. Lots of people talking about the sunrise. Clearly not something that reached Coventry. I think we have had grey skies all morning, so lucky you having such lovely weather. People also talking about work, people talking about being having opportunities to help, some staff volunteering to cover a shift. Oh, lots of people talking about Christmas, people putting up their Christmas trees already. That's so organised. I haven't bought any presents yet. Oh, grandchildren and children. I'd say majority of comments are about pets, family members, Christmas, and nature, which is, it's lovely to see. Please do keep them coming. It always makes me smile to read people's comments. And I think it's a really lovely reminder as we come into this session on professional curiosity that we are all human beings first and professionals second. As Teresa recognised when she started off this conference, sometimes pausing to learn can feel quite difficult. Some of the topics we cover can be hard, but it's also quite hard sometimes just to stop and reflect. It can feel like all of the stress from work kind of catches up to you when you pause and reflect. So over the next hour, if you do want to take a break at any points, sort of seek some support, switch your attention away for a moment, I will not be at all offended. Please do whatever you need to do to stay safe and present in today's session and really make the most of it for yourself and your practice. I thought we might start by thinking, when we're thinking about professional curiosity, by thinking about what it might mean for some of the people that we work with. And I'm going to share a short video. It's really very short, only 45 seconds, from a man called Danny. Danny is from Lads Like Us. If you haven't heard Lads Like Us speak before, I'd really encourage you to look them up on the internet. They are absolutely fantastic. And I'll pop some of their resources in the resource sheet that you'll get afterwards. Danny and his co-founders are trauma-informed trainers and founders of the Ask Why movement, calling for professionals to be both trauma-informed and professionally curious. And Danny talks in this short video about the impact that it had on him when a professional exercised professional curiosity with him as part of their work with him as an adult. I'm going to share the video now. If you can't hear the video, don't worry at all. We'll send it to you afterwards so you can listen to it in your own time. And you can just enjoy having a minute of really nice peace and quiet.
Trauma-informed practice and professional curiosity saved my life and saved Mike's life as well. So, you know, this little session, what we call is million pieces. We won't smash into a million pieces, just ask. So there's this big misconception that, oh God, I can't ask this or can't ask that. And it's like, who's that really about? Is that about you or is that about the person? Because there's this big thing about, oh God, we're going to open a can of worms. Guess what? When someone asked me that question, it didn't open a can of worms. It opened a door to healing. I know loads of people who have smashed into a million pieces who haven't asked these questions.
A real flavour of Danny's session, and you can go and look him up to watch him speak for a lot longer than that. And the questions he's talking about is someone asking some really curious questions about some of the experiences that he'd had in the past, and they asked it in a sort of trauma-informed and sensitive way, but it helped him to make the links between what had happened in the past and what he was experiencing as an adult. I'm just going to share my slides. And I think something that really stood out to me, at least from that video, is that quote from Danny. When someone asked me those questions, it didn't open a can of worms, it opened a door to healing. It really chimes with another quote from the Tackling Child Exploitation Practice Principles, which try and give a common language and framework to addressing exploitation and extra-familial harm. From the children's world, but I think really useful to think about the applicability to work with adults. And this is one of their principles, which is for professionals to be curious, evidence-informed and knowledgeable. And on the basis of their work with lots of young people and their carers and the adults in their lives, they talked about how that might feel. And they said this: I feel properly seen because the people who are there to help me put in the effort to understand me and my lives. They are knowledgeable and always learning about how to help me feel safer. I wanted to start with these couple of quotes and with that really short clip from Danny, because I think that when we talk about professional curiosity, we often talk about it exclusively, or we focus on it in a safeguarding context, often when an adult has died or been seriously harmed. And there are questions about, people ask why professionals weren't more curious. And that's important and really useful, and we'll come back to unpick some of that later. But I wanted to start here because I think that professional curiosity is fundamentally about relationship-based and strengths-based practice. A recent article argued that we should reframe professional curiosity. Instead of seeing it as a tool for investigative safeguarding work, or primarily as a tool for investigative work, we should also and primarily see it as an approach to helping people through authentic and significant relationships. Really seeing people as worthy of our curiosity and recognising what all of you in your safeguarding roles are doing day in and day out, which is working in partnership with people to really support them and try to make sense with them of what's going on in their lives. And I think that's the case at every level of an organisation, whether you're in frontline practice or you're in a position of management or leadership. I think that's what professional curiosity comes down to. And if professional curiosity is all about relationships, it makes sense to think about curiosity through the lens of people. We can think about it as a combination of personality, outlook, behaviours and skills acquired by individuals. And I wonder which of these kind of different kinds of attributes you see yourself or your practice in. It looks like people who enjoy learning and enjoy knowledge, like people who can tolerate uncertainty, or organisations perhaps who can tolerate uncertainty and are open to new ideas and other people's stories. It looks like people who are willing to challenge and reflect and analyse, and also have a good understanding of their role. So there's a bit right at the end there about legal literacy, people who have a good understanding of their role and the legal context for their role. I don't think these are innate qualities. They're not things that some people have and some people just don't. I think they're things that can be learnt, and also things that organisations can nurture. A literature review last year looked at the experiences of health and social care professionals exercising professional curiosity, and they framed the experience of being curious in 3 steps. Firstly, they talk about noticing novelty and what doesn't fit. They call this noticing dissonance, which is just a fancy academic word for noticing something that doesn't quite fit. This might be what someone says, it might be what they do, it might be the way they appear, it might be really small details and non-verbal cues. It's really recognising that what we see, especially on a first impression, is only the tip of the iceberg, and that there's going to be a lot more going on underneath. It was really interesting to hear that really informative presentation about cuckooing, or the exploitation of adults in their homes, and to hear about some of those often quite subtle signs that things aren't quite right, that might provoke us to be curious about what's really going on. So we've noticed that things aren't quite right, something's not quite sitting right with us. The second thing that we do as professionals is try, along with the person that we're working with, to really explore the evidence of what's happening, and also managing the tension that comes alongside that. And those two kind of run in parallel. Exploring evidence might look like asking sensitive questions, or reflecting with colleagues, or talking to partners. But alongside that, there's this really tricky tension that comes, I think, with professional curiosity. You're managing uncertainty. You know, you realise there's a lot you don't know, but actually that comes with uncertainty and challenge in practice. There's also a tension and an uncomfortableness that can come with asking difficult questions and asking probing questions. And there's a risk that you might get it wrong. I think there might also be a tension inherent in curiosity. In our personal lives, if we're really, really curious about something, it can come across as quite intrusive or prying. And sometimes healthy skepticism, really poking under the surface of things, can make it harder to build trusting relationships with people because they might feel like we don't trust them. So you're doing all of that, you're exploring evidence, you're managing kind of the emotions and the tension of professional curiosity. The third step they talk about is really trying to make sense of what's happening, using reasoning and critical thinking and analysis, discussions perhaps with colleagues or with a manager to try to make sense of what's going on. We know there's a big underneath to an iceberg, but how do we use the evidence and our reasoning and our logic to try to make sense of what's happening underneath? And of course, that all continues. One of the barriers to professional curiosity is thinking that we're finished with it. I don't think we ever fully make sense necessarily of what's going on. So if that's what professional curiosity is, the question for you is, what can we do to help ourselves and our organisations to be more curious? Dickens and his colleagues, a group of his colleagues, did a big article where they reviewed lots of what were then called serious case reviews. And they found that in those reviews, all too often, a lack of professional curiosity and challenge was given as an explanation for why professionals didn't spot abuse, without looking at why professional curiosity wasn't there. So they kind of stop at saying people weren't curious and don't get to the stage of asking why people weren't curious. So I wanted to ask you this question. And again, I'm going to be quiet for a little bit to give you a chance to think about it. And then invite you to pop a suggestion or an answer in the chat if you're comfortable to. What gets in the way of professional curiosity for your organisation or you or your service? Like I said, I am going to be quiet, so you'll hear an awkward silence for a couple of minutes, but please enjoy it. And then, yeah, if you're comfortable to, pop an idea in the chat. If you've already popped an answer in the chat, do take a moment to scroll back through. Don't feel like you need to read everyone's answers. There's loads in there, but just pick a couple that you like. Have a read of them. If you think they're useful, give them a like or a heart so other people know that they're a really useful answer and let that person know that you found what they've written useful. A few more minutes. All right. Feel free to keep popping some answers in the chat. I've been doing my best to go through and read. I think I've got most of them, and just try to split them roughly into some themes that I think are coming out quite strongly. Apologies if I've missed your input into the chat, and I've definitely missed everyone's name. So if you hear your comment, apologies if I don't also say your name. I think there's a really big theme in the chat around organisational context and culture. To me, it seemed like probably one of the most common words in the chat was time. And that comes down to things like workload, it comes down to organisational structures and processes, really recognising that we need time to do really good professional curiosity. A safeguarding adult review from Gloucestershire talked, a sort of team in that review talked about feeling like they were working in air traffic control. And I think sometimes in safeguarding roles, it can feel like you're doing that a little bit, like you're coordinating so many different things coming from so many different places, and it can feel a bit non-stop and that you don't have time. And time is important. We need time to do direct work with people, to talk to them, but also time to think and reflect and question. So that's one aspect. People talked as well in that kind of organisational culture bit around having access to training and supervision, kind of thinking about the time, but also the skill, I suppose, the skill and support to do professional curiosity well. People also talked a little bit about organisational and team culture. So someone talked about needing, or rather poor leadership, getting in the way of professional curiosity. We might also think about responsibility and blame. Someone put a really interesting comment in the chat about kind of litigious, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, culture, and the kind of impact that the media can have on decisions that we make. And I think a lot of that might come down to whether we have an organisational culture or a societal culture of blame shifting or responsibility taking. So do we shift blame from person to person? Do you feel like you're going to get blamed unfairly if things go wrong? Or do we have organisations that really take responsibility and support the work that we're doing? So huge theme around organisational context, culture and support. There was also a theme around confidence, people saying that they didn't necessarily feel confident, or that might get in the way of professional curiosity, confidence and skill. And that might link back to some of those organisational themes around the kind of support that you can access as part of your organisation. A couple of people posted in the chat around culture, which might also fit in with the kind of confidence and skill. You know, do you have the confidence and skill to work across cultures with people who are different to you? Some of that is about knowledge and skill. I think some of that is also comes back to that idea of time, you know, having the time to really build empathic and understanding relationships and try to really understand somebody's culture and their family. Big theme there. Another theme that came through in the chat was around the emotional demands of the work that you're doing when you're working in safeguarding. People talked about fear quite a lot, around fear that they wouldn't know what to do if somebody did tell them something, fear that there wouldn't be kind of, there wouldn't be anywhere to go with it. So somebody tells you something and you can't do anything about it. And also fear of disrupting a relationship with somebody. Within that theme, I think there are another couple of things that we can think about. We can think about this idea of avoidance, which is when, as professionals, we become so overwhelmed or anxious or frightened that we can start to try to avoid interactions with people, sort of shut down, either physically, sort of avoid telephone calls, things like that, or emotionally. So we're in visits, but we're not really present. And I imagine that for most of you, it's an experience that you've had. Certainly, when I was a social worker, I had that experience, and I would say most social workers and other people working in safeguarding have shared that experience with me as well. We can also think about this thing called normalization, which is when things like poverty or risk or things like substance abuse misuse becomes so common, we work with them so many times that they can start to feel like they're normal. There's a really helpful quote, I think, from Kate Morris, who did a big paper on social work and deprivation. And she wrote that poverty has become the wallpaper of practice, too big to handle and too familiar to notice. And sometimes things can feel so normal to us that it really gets in the way of us being curious. Other people sort of linking in with that have written in the chat around bias, people sort of your own biases sometimes getting in the way of professional curiosity, and we'll come back and think about that a bit more later. So themes around organisational context and culture, themes around the emotional demands of work and how confident you feel going out. Finally, I think there can be a bit of a challenge to professional curiosity around multi-agency working. People talked about not being sure about what services were available, or if they were still running, or if they closed, if they were still open. People talked about not feeling confident that other partners would back them up. So they might go out, ask some difficult questions, explore things, and then might not feel like they're being well supported by the multi-agency team around them. And finally, there can be a little bit of a challenge around information sharing with multi-agency partners. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that feeling. Sometimes it can be hard to get hold of information or to know information from partners. Sometimes it can also feel like you receive information from partners, but the meaning of that information might not be fully understood. For example, if you're a health professional and you share a diagnosis with somebody, are you confident that the person you're sharing the diagnosis with really understands what that means? And sometimes that can really get in the way of professional curiosity because we don't know really what's going on. So thank you so much. It was fantastic to see some really, really interesting themes coming out in the chat there, and really kind of thoughtful and careful reflection. And I think it really emphasises something that Dickens and his colleagues point out, which is that when we ask why professional curiosity isn't there sometimes, it really opens up a much more interesting conversation than just stopping it at people aren't curious enough. So thank you for that, lots to kind of take away and mull over. Over the rest of the session, we're going to be thinking about professional curiosity in practice, but I just thought briefly I'd pause for a moment on that organisational culture bit, because as much as we can talk about practice, really to be truly curious, you do need to be well supported by your organisation. And this resource is really helpful if you're in a bit more of a strategic position, if you're a leader or a manager, all about how you can build a professionally curious organisation in safeguarding adults. It goes through lots of really practical actions you can take, how you can structure your team and your working, lots of links to useful resources, and some example scenarios you could do with your teams. It is a resource that's only available to members. So if you're a leader or a manager here from a different service within Surrey outside of social care, feel free to grab one of your social care colleagues and ask them to send it to you. I'm sure that would be absolutely fine. However, we are going to think a bit more about practice today, but just want to emphasise that when you're hearing all of this stuff about practice, please do keep in mind that you do need your organisation to support you as well, and that's really important. One of the things that we often think about when we think about professionally curious practice, is around communication. When we think about professional curiosity, we often think about asking questions, and I can see that came up in the chat quite a few times, people talking about the uncomfortableness of asking difficult questions. Of course, communication is more than just asking questions. Communication is also all about listening and observing. It is about asking good questions, and by that I mean questions that are asked in a way that try to support people to answer. They're asked openly, in an open way, they're asked in a supportive way. Communication involves reflecting and analysing. It involves clear explanations. And this quote I really like from work with parents who experience recurrent care proceedings, which means that they had lots of children removed, one after the other. And in this quote, this author talks about what some of the parents said they really wanted when people were having really difficult safeguarding conversations with them. And they said they wanted straight talking with warmth. They wanted people to be really honest, but they also wanted them to be warm and empathetic. We are going to watch another little video, this time about communication. This is one of my favourite videos on the Research in Practice website and is totally free for everyone to access. This video features someone called Gavin Ruff, who has experience of adult social care. He'll introduce himself in the video. And we're just going to watch the first few minutes of the video. It's all free on the website, and we'll send it round afterwards. But we're going to watch the first few minutes, and he talks about the importance of language in communication, which I think is particularly important if we're having those kind of more difficult conversations. So again, I'm going to share my screen. If you can't hear this or you can't see it, just enjoy having 4.5 minutes of peace and quiet. You know, make yourself a cup of tea, sit back in your chair and relax, and you can watch it later in your own time.
Hello everyone, I'm Gavin Ruff. Welcome to our film presentation on strengths-based working. Hopefully, this film will be a useful tool for all sorts of people who work in adult social care. An important point that we want to make is that if you're working in social care, we know that you're a good egg. I am 30 years old. I live by myself and I have autism. I enjoy doing drama at Get Changed and making music at Soundwaves and with my friend Kathy. My favourite band is Little Mix.
Are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready, thanks.
Okay mate, so if you duck down out of sight.
As an actor, I've been involved in making this film
Action.
to show you various scenarios related to strengths-based practice. This is my friend Camille.
Hiya.
You may recognise Camille from the brilliant Channel 4 series Lee and Dean, which unfortunately not enough people watched, so it won't be getting a third series.
Gavin, don't tell them that.
I'm sorry. She will be playing a social worker in this film.
Yes, I will. And my mum is actually a social worker, so if you're watching this, hi Mum.
Hello Sharon, if you're watching. 1. Language. Language is supposed to make communication clearer, but well-meaning jargon can sometimes get in the way.
Part of my role is to build a relationship with you.
That's very flattering, but I'm afraid you're not my type.
I'd like to talk about building bridges in the community.
Well, I've never done it before, but I'll give it a try.
How can we get you connected to services?
But I'm already connected.
Tell me about your assets.
Well, I got £7 in here.
What do you think your gifts are?
Oh, my main gift was the Roxy jukebox system, where it gives you music quizzes where you can name the song.
I'm your named worker.
I know, you're Camille.
What are your strengths?
Strengths. As you can see, it is very easy to misunderstand. How do you check understanding?
Well, it's a bit light-hearted, but I love that film. It goes on, and Gavin and Camille go through some different examples of the kinds of conversations that you can have and different ways to approach conversations. I really like it because I think the video really gets how busy we can sometimes be working in this the fields that we work in, and has some really practical suggestions around how to have really good conversations when you are busy. We'll include it in the resource sheet that's sent out afterwards, so you can watch the whole film, and it's free, so you're welcome to share it with your teams if that's something that you'd find useful. Something that around communication that I heard recently that I found really helpful was from a workshop with a psychologist called Ted Daskiewicz, and he talked about a really handy 4-point framework for asking challenging questions based on motivational interviewing, or sort of some of the work by Miller and Rolnick, who developed motivational interviewing. And so he talked about just his, and this is all based on his experience really, around 4 things that are really useful if you have to ask a difficult question. Firstly, prepare the person before a challenge. You might ask questions like, is it okay to talk about this? Offering some choice, like, should we do this now? Should we do it at the end? What would make it easier for you to have a conversation about this topic? That's the first thing. Do a little bit of work preparing somebody. Secondly, explain why you're doing that. You know, it's not easy. We all have, I'm sure we've all experienced it, maybe at a health appointment, or when working with public services or working with other professionals. When we've been asked questions that are quite hard, it really helps if you know why someone's asking that question, and why it might be useful for them to talk to you about it. So prepare, explain. Thirdly, acknowledge how they might be feeling. You know, trying not to make judgments or taking sides, but just acknowledge that asking these questions is difficult for people. And finally, offering a way out if appropriate. You know, for example, you know, let me know if you need to take a break, that kind of thing. I found that kind of 4-point framework: preparation, explaining, acknowledging how someone might be feeling, and offering a way out, really useful. A couple of resources around communication that are handy. Firstly, this resource around difficult conversations. The briefing, which is the picture on the slide, is for social care in particular, and is just accessible to those who are members. But the free video resources talk about 2 different approaches to having difficult conversations: non-violent communication and 6 steps to entering conversations with curiosity. Both videos are free and they're only about 6 minutes each, so really worth a watch, or a watch perhaps as a team, something to reflect on together. So that's one really useful resource. The other useful resource is this one around embedding strengths-based practice. Lots of really useful tips and clues in there. Again, the briefing is for social care, but the free resources below are available for anybody. There's a short guide, so it explains to people who draw on care and support services what strengths-based practice actually means. I think there's a real value in sharing with people what our model is. And there's also that film that we just watched about strengths-based practice from Gavin, and there's a link to that there. So communication is one aspect of practice that really helps professional curiosity. Another aspect of practice alongside communication that lots of you talked about in the chat is that the kind of emotional demands that comes on us of being curious. Harry Ferguson, who is a researcher in children's social care, did something called ethnographic research. And what that means is that he became sort of part of a social work team as a researcher. So he went out on visits, he sat in on team meetings, he was in the office, and he observed that sometimes the same practitioner would be really, really curious in one interaction, and they'd find the time to see children in this case, to really explore what was going on, to ask those curious questions. And then in other interactions found that much, much more difficult. And he questioned why that was. Why is it that the same practitioner could be so curious in one scenario and not in another? And his answer is that it is down to the emotional lived reality of practice. He talks in this quote, he says this: how people, he says how children, but we can argue it's how people become invisible, must be understood in terms of the interaction of organisational processes, which we've talked about, the practitioner's qualities, so your skill level, what you know, how you do your job, and also their visceral experiences and emotional state during face-to-face encounters, and the atmosphere within which practice occurs. And he talks about this idea of detachment, when workers reach or go beyond the limits of anxiety and complexity that's possible for them to tolerate, which can make it really, really hard to go underneath the surface. This quote is from I think it's a social worker, but it might be an occupational therapist in adult social care. And they talk about this experience. So they say this: when I talked to my manager in supervision, I admitted to myself that I'd knocked on the door deliberately quietly and left quickly, telling myself they weren't in. The client's husband can be quite aggressive, and it's hard to have a constructive conversation with them. I wonder if anyone can relate to this. I can certainly relate to that feeling of going for a visit or a meeting with somebody, kind of hoping they don't turn up, or making a phone call and hoping that someone doesn't pick up, just because I feel like I haven't got the emotional resources to deal with it on that day. Thanks for the thumbs up in the thing. That makes me feel slightly better about feeling that way sometimes. It's echoed across research, though. That feeling is really echoed across lots of research. So if you are feeling that way, you are certainly not alone or that way sometimes. Some research with probation workers and their experience of professional curiosity, they talked about feeling like sometimes asking curious questions is a bit like opening Pandora's box. And you get left with, you feel sort of questions like, can I handle this? What will I actually do if someone tells me something? Am I going to be able to handle the answer that comes out of this question? The social worker or the practitioner that we talked about earlier, they came back and they talked about what helped them in that situation when they were feeling all that big range of emotions. And they said this: my manager asked me what was challenging about the situation and what was really going on. Those questions really helped me to see that I was trying to avoid a difficult situation. And what they're really talking about here is having the opportunity to reflect. Having the chance to reflect in practice is so important. Sometimes the busier that we are, the less time we have to reflect. But actually, the more time we need to reflect, especially when things are really tricky. There is an organisational responsibility that comes with that. Organisations do need to create time for people to reflect and think. There's also an individual responsibility to find and carve out bits of time to find for reflection. And I know that people have talked about doing that with colleagues, about finding time for reflecting in the car or the bus on the way to an appointment or a meeting. So I thought we might do another brief pause point to let you have a think about this question and put an answer in the chat if you have one. What helps you to stay curious and relational when you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed? What helps you to stay curious and relational when you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed? Again, I'll give you a bit of time to reflect, and then do share a message in the chat for a colleague who it might help. Fantastic. Lots of really interesting answers in the chat. Again, if you've written an answer, take a moment just to read a couple that are in the chat and give them a like if you found it helpful. Yeah, fantastic. Lots of really interesting themes coming out. So there's a strong theme around returning to principles and values, kind of thinking back to why you got into this work in the first place, and also back to what the person you're working with might be feeling or experiencing, and trying to use that to kind of come back to your original feelings, to come back to your kind of original principles and values. Lots of people talking about support from others, remembering that you are hopefully in a team, that you have colleagues, that you have partners that might also be working in the situation, and talking and sharing those experiences. Lots of people giving examples of kind of emotional regulation, so trying to come into that place of being calm so that you can really be the best professional that you can be in that situation. People talking about, yes, returning to principles, and also taking deep breaths, doing some breathing exercises or grounding exercises, having a snack or a short break, doing things that you know will help you to regulate your emotions. And lots of people talking about reflecting. I think sometimes, and people have pointed this out, sometimes it's useful to think about why that person might be responding in the way that you are worried about, or the way that you find quite difficult. Sometimes really helpful to think through why that might be. And to be curious. But we know that to be curious, you do need to be calm. So it is worth sometimes starting off with some of that support from others, and some of that really kind of grounded, emotionally regulating practice. To finish then, as well as all of those relational skills and emotional wisdom that you need to do this work, professional curiosity also involves analysis and critical thinking, really making sense of what is happening. I thought I'd just share with you one useful tool for doing some really curious analysis and critical thinking, and that is this Woonnacott's discrepancy matrix. It's called that because someone called Jane Woonnacott kind of developed it based on her work around supervision. And it's really useful in helping you to think critically about the information that your decisions are based on. So what do you do with it? Well, you first of all give a little summary, either in your head or in conversation, if you're in conversation with other people, about the sort of current scenario, about the person that you're working with and why you're working with them. And then you split your information into 4 boxes. So first of all, you split some of your information into what do I know? That's the box on the top left. And that is for all of the things that have really strong evidence and broad agreement. So for example, you might be working with a couple, and you might think, or you might have evidence that there is violence in their relationship. Perhaps you have police records that show that. It's backed up by social care records. There's evidence from the hospital. The partners themselves have told you that there's violence in their relationship. So you could put that quite confidently in your evidence box. The second box you have is for information that's ambiguous, and that's on the top right. That's where you have strong evidence, but there's disagreement or ambiguity or discrepancy. For example, you might have a view that this is a relationship that's characterised by coercive control from one partner to another, and that the violence is predominantly from one person to another. But the people that you're working with have told you that's not true, and that although there is violence, it's both ways and only happens when they've both been drinking alcohol. In the bottom right corner, you have a box for information that's missing. And that's what you realise when you do your little summary or you talk to a colleague, you realise you actually don't know. And I think it's really nice to have a box where you can acknowledge all the things that you're not sure about. So that bottom right corner, for example, you might realise that you have absolutely no idea what the extended family or network of this couple think about their relationship. It's not to say you necessarily need to know, but it's really useful to make a record of what and think for yourself about what is missing. And then finally, you have the box in the bottom right, which is for all the things that have you hold as a strong view, or perhaps other people hold as a strong view, but actually on reflection have quite weak evidence for them. It's a box that gives us permission to write down all the things that we think based on all of our practice wisdom, and recognises that that can be a real strength, you know, all of those intuitive thoughts or things based on wisdom. But it also gives us permission to recognise potential bias in the thinking that's happening around this scenario. For example, there might be an assumption in the professional network that we know exactly what's going on in this relationship because this is the couple that's had support from services for many, many years. And there's therefore an assumption that we know exactly what's going on. Within that box, we might also think critically about power and bias. One really useful way of doing that is to think through different aspects of identity and how they're interacting to inform our ability to be curious. And one useful tool to do this is the social graces, which is a series of letters that describe different aspects of identity that affect power and privilege. So, for example, one of those is education. Your access to education can affect how much power or privilege that you have. And I think you see good examples of that in Houses of Parliament and where people are educated. And the aim is to really better understand power differentials. It's not to say you'd go through every single one of those letters, but you might pull out a few if you're thinking critically about your own bias and perhaps the bias of other people. I don't think you can do this tool for every single scenario that you come across in your role in safeguarding, but I think it can be really useful if you're feeling really stuck. If you're working with a scenario that just feels like you're not sure what to do with it, where to go, it can be a really useful tool for doing with people that you're working with, to see what they think about what everyone knows and what people aren't sure about. Also a really useful tool for doing as a multi-agency group, you know, who thinks bits of information should go in the evidence box and who doesn't agree. Again, if you're all particularly stuck on something. So I'd really recommend that you take 15 minutes at some point this week to try and fill this out for something that's really worrying you at the moment. One of those situations that is keeping you up at night and making you feel quite worried, and see what comes out of it. See what how it kind of provokes professional curiosity for you. So we've made it to the end. It's almost 12 o'clock. I hope I've given a little bit of time for Q&A, probably not as much time as I was meant to, so apologies for that. But thank you very, very much for coming. There's a picture of balloons on the slide. That's partly to congratulate me for getting through the presentation, but it's also to say that sometimes when I come to days like this, I feel like I get so much interesting information, but it's like a whole bunch of helium balloons and it's going to fly away if I don't remember it. So at some point today, do take a moment to make a note on a balloon and really tie that down in your head, so that you remember what it is that you want to take away from today. And just thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be part of today's session. Yeah, thank you. I will stop sharing my slides.
Emily, thank you so much for that. I think everyone has taken a lot away from that, looking at the comments in the chat. If anyone does have a question for Emily, if you want to put it in the Q&A section of the webinar, that would be really welcomed. Only that I think we'd probably lose it in the chat because there's so much chat still going on between us, and we're really grateful for your input. So I don't think there's anything in the Q&A at the moment, but I'll give you a sort of a minute if anyone wants to ask a question of Emily. Please feel free to. Lots of positive feedback on the session as well, which is always really valuable. I think we've all been in that situation, maybe, that actually this is really valuable to recognise us as practitioners as well. So right, given I can't see anything at the moment in the chat, but please feel free to put something in if you think something over your lunch break. We're now going to move to our lunch break. And we are also, thank you, Emily. I see you've come off screen, but thank you so much for that. We will share Emily's slides and also the free resources, and we will also talk to RIPFA, because I recognised a lot of people were asking for that document, which is only eligible at the moment for members. So we'll have a discussion. We're now going to break for lunch, which is until 12:30. We are going to put you into breakout rooms, possibly with a few more people than last time. However, please don't feel as though you need to be in the breakout room. Please go have a break away from your screen. We recognise we want to take breaks away, refresh yourself, replenish yourselves, and take some time for you. So when you do come back, you may be in a breakout room. We haven't got speech on at the moment, so if the person wants to put a question in the chat or in the Q&A, really welcome for that. I can see a hand up. We will then put you into your breakout rooms. Karen will do that, move you around. So please, if you go out, come back and see actually there's only a few people. That's only because you're in your breakout room. We'll then call you back just before 12:30. If you want to log off from the session to have a real break, please feel free to do that. Just allow enough time to come back in via the lobby. So I can't see anything being put in the Q&A. So oh, there is someone has put, Jack's put, developing professional curiosity is something integral to develop. Any suggestions to put something in place for our offices of district nurses, GPs and community matrons? Anything from you, Emily, around that one?
If you can get a colleague to send you that, I think it might be Karen, to send you that briefing on professional curious organisations. It was developed for social care based on primarily on safeguarding adult reviews and what they found, but has some really useful and kind of practical tips that are totally applicable for any organisation. Just think about how you can develop both practitioners, but also your environment and how you work and your processes to really enable people to be professionally curious in practice. So do have a look at that, and it has, from memory, it has kind of tips and advice for sort of team manager level, but also if you're at slightly more strategic level, some advice for you as well. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Emily. And just to Charita, yes, slides and presentations and videos will all be shared with attendees, but also put on the board's website. So it will be available for you, the resources.